I wondered if anyone would have said, I'm thankful for suffering. Doesn't make sense, does it? Thankful for suffering. John 16:33. I'm not preaching there, but I did want to share this verse. These things, Jesus says, I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Not exactly the encouragement to start a Thanksgiving message that you might expect, but then again, I believe many Christians today are not being equipped properly by their pastor for the real Christian life. For example, a number of reports have been coming out specifically the last few months, and if you haven't been paying attention that long, for at least the last few weeks, about the various human rights and religious advocacy groups claiming that Nigeria is currently the most dangerous place on the face of the earth to be if you are a Christian. At least 52,250 Christians have been killed over the last 14 years in Nigeria. That's just the ones that have been reported. A new report in April goes on to say that martyred Christians in Nigeria from the International Society of Civil Liberties has now explained that 30,000 of those 52,000 have happened since 2015. Further indicates that since President Buhari has been in charge of Nigeria, that 18,000 Christian churches and 2,200 Christian schools have been incinerated, burned to the ground. For 6 months we haven't had water, yet we worshiped. For 18 months we weren't able to gather inside, but we were able to gather outside. Schools, churches, incinerated in Nigeria. Attacks on Christians have led to significant problems in regard to many of these folks being forced to flee from their homes. There's 50 million Christians, mostly in northern Nigeria, who have faced serious jihadist threats for professing to be a Christian. No fewer than 14 million of them have been uprooted, and 8 million forced to flee from their homes to avoid being hacked to death. Not my words, that's from this report. What's the U.S.'s response? Nicki Minaj made major news this past week for coming out and bringing this to the forefront of her culture, the hip-hop culture, and talking about the atrocities here. The crisis has drawn international attention, and U.S. politicians and the U.S. government under President Trump has placed Nigeria on a special watch list for the religious freedom concerns that threaten sanctions or military, now he's threatening military interaction that are attacking Christians. These actions and claims have met with shock and rejection from the Nigerian government. They view these attacks as simply government issues. It's not far from happening here. If you pay attention, if you're not a ostrich keeping your head in the sand, it can happen here. James, the brother of Jesus himself, knew a little bit about suffering. He said in James chapter 1, verse 2 and 3, my brethren. I love to look at words. Who's James talking to? Christians. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Are we thankful for suffering? This past July 27th, I preached a message, Christmas in July, and the following Sunday in August, I began a series on the life of Joseph in Genesis, and we've had 13 different messages since then on the life of Joseph, and today we culminate this series in Genesis chapter 50. Joseph has certainly had a lot of his own suffering to deal with in his life. Last week we saw the blessings that Joseph received through his father Jacob while Jacob was on his deathbed. And today I want us to see that Joseph's father has just died. Chapter 50, verse 1 through 3. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and he wept over him and he kissed him. And then Joseph commanded his servants and the physicians to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel, Jacob. Verse 3, 40 days are required for him, for such are the days required to those who are embalmed, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. 70 days is just 2 days shy of what a pharaoh would receive during the mourning process. Apparently, these people in Egypt had such respect for Joseph that when Joseph's dad died, they gave him almost as much as they would give a pharaoh. Verse 4, Genesis 50. Now when the days of his mourning passed, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh. You see, 70 days of mourning, Joseph's in no condition to approach Pharaoh himself, so he sends his people to go talk to Pharaoh. Joseph is unshaven. He's been in mourning. He's crying. His eyes are swelled. He's bloodshot. And he asked Pharaoh's servants to give Pharaoh a message. This is what it says in verse 4. If I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, verse 5. Please tell Pharaoh, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I'm dying. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go and bury my father, and I will come back. Verse 6. And Pharaoh said, go up, bury your father, as he has made you swear. 7. So Joseph went up, buried his father, and with him went up with the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of the house, the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, and his brothers, his father's house. Only the little ones, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. You can imagine that funeral procession from Egypt back home. All the dignitaries of Egypt are going to assist their friend Joseph. Verse 9 and 10 tell us that Joseph as he's gotten closer and closer, remember he hadn't been home in a long time, as he's getting closer and closer on this walk, this funeral procession, as he's getting closer and closer to the place that his dad is going to be buried, we read in verse 9 and 10 that Joseph wept loudly. The word lamentation is used, and it's a beautiful word that we don't typically use in our English language anymore. Lamentation is translated best as wailing, howling, weeping. Joseph, according to this passage, is so overwhelmed with not only the grief of his father, but he's going back home after such a long time that he stops his funeral procession and mourns for 7 more days. Remember, Joseph has been gone for 39 years. He was thrown into slavery and sold in Egypt when he was 17. Now, as a grown man, he's coming back home to bury his father. His grief is so overwhelming that the neighbors take notice. I want to add one point, and I put it in your notes. because I need you to be able to talk to the Lord yourself on this one. Some of you have had such a great loss in your life that you have never fully grieved. You're walking around in a fog, you think that you're coping, when in fact it's obvious you're not. I will tell you this, every counseling course I ever took says the same thing. No one can tell you how long your grief process needs to be. That's something between you and God. But I'll tell you, if you don't properly grieve, you will hurt yourself and unintentionally hurt those that are around you. If you have not properly grieved, you need to take time to do that. Verses 12 to 14 tell us that Joseph and his brothers buried their father, and then they returned with this entourage to Egypt. Joseph was a man of great faith. He persevered through years of slavery and years in the prison. And even he forgave his brothers. Why? Because he truly believed that God was in control. Joseph was not only a great man of faith, but he was a great leader. And even though he shed many tears, this in no way diminished his faith. I have met Christians that you just want to lay hands on. You need to stop crying and take my faith and just stop it, folks. Please don't do that. I don't know how long it takes for a person to grieve, but we have no business telling a person they've had enough grief time. It's not our job. Joseph cries when his brothers come to Egypt the first time in Genesis 42. Then we see again in Genesis 43, Joseph cries again when his brothers have to return to Egypt the second time. Genesis 45, Joseph cried again when he had revealed himself to his brothers. And here we are in Genesis 50, and Joseph is crying over the death of his father. This idea that strong men don't cry is a lie. Tears are not a sign of weakness, they're a sign of great strength. In describing the coming Messiah, Jesus, Isaiah says in Isaiah 53:3, he was a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. John 11:35, shortest verse in the Bible, over the death of his friend Lazarus, and seeing Mary, Martha, and the family hurting so bad, Jesus wept. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 7. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Joseph cries here. Jesus cried. In fact, hear me, our tears are precious to the Lord. Psalm 56 and verse 8, David says to the Lord, you number my wanderings, and you put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? I am completely convinced through my study of the Bible that when we Christians hurt, when God's people hurt, God himself hurts. Romans 5 verse 3 to 4 puts it this way, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. So let me ask you again, are we thankful for suffering? Let our tears wash away those old grudges, that old thoughts and pain and hurt from years before. Let them renew and strengthen your new relationships with the people that God is placing in your life. Let your tears be tender toward other people, not tough. That's what Joseph's tears did for him. Look at verse 15 to 17, Genesis 50. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil we've done to him." 16. So they sent messengers to Joseph and saying, "Before your father died, he commanded, saying," 17, "Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you to please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of your God, of the God of your father." So Joseph, guess what he did? He wept again. And then when they spoke to him. Do you see the manipulation by the brothers? There's nowhere, anywhere in the passage, nowhere in the original language that I could find, nowhere here in Genesis, that Jacob ever said to the boys, "Hey, when I die, make sure you tell Joseph not to kill you." They're manipulating him because even the death of their father, they're still trying to look out for the best what's good for them. Do you see the manipulation? That's why the offender always wants to play the victim. There's no evidence of their guilt except through this conscious decision. These brothers have underestimated the faith of Joseph. They don't understand that Joseph, as he says here, God's the judge, not me, right? Verse 18 to 19. He said, God will take care of this. I gave that to God a long time ago, guys. Joseph trusted God to bring the good out of the evil that the brothers intended for him. Look at what he says in verse 20 to 21. "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you for these little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. You had a plan to destroy me. God allowed that plan. God didn't design that plan. God never designs hurt for us. Nowhere is this even implied. But God allowed the evil plan that they had developed because he knew years later Israel and these Jewish people will need to be fed and saved from the famine that's coming. I don't know about you, but I am very, very thankful for the ability to forgive, because I'm convinced at 62 and a half years old that some people just don't. They don't have that ability. They don't acknowledge their own sin, their own faults. Sandy and I had this conversation this weekend. And that's one of the things I've said. Sandy, let it go. It has nothing to do with anything anymore. Stop worrying about it. Stop fussing. Stop fretting. It's done. Why do you still worry about something that happened 15 years ago or whatever? Stop. It only hurts you. God has a plan. Psalm 37 and verse 23 says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in their way." You see, as long as you remain doing God's work, doing God's will, he will protect you. That's what he does with Joseph. Can you imagine? Put yourself back 2,000 years ago. You're hanging out and you hear crowds gathering outside of your house. And then you start hearing shouts, "Crucify him." And you're not alarmed because typically that happens in the culture. And then you find out it's this guy, Jesus, that's been preaching. You've never heard anything bad about him. And yet the crowds are screaming, crucify him. And you jump in with the crowd because he's got to be bad. Everybody says he's bad. He deserves death. Everybody's got to know that, right? So you jump in the crowd, right? Unless you're one or two that got to hang out with them. And you've got to say, wait a minute, I've been with Jesus for 3 years here. And I know he's sent by God and there's a plan here. His own mother knows that he's virgin born and this is a special person. And you've got to be asking yourself, how can any of this be God's will? In the midst of whatever trial and pain and suffering you're going through, we cannot look and say, this must be God's plan. And yet here you and I sit. Evidence of God's redemptive plan. None of us could have done it on our own. None of us or ever would have been capable. Watching the pain and the sorrow and the violence, how could any of us said this was God's plan? 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, Romans chapter 12, 17 to 21, all remind us, do not repay evil for evil. And yet so often that's the first thing we think of. So often we are vindictive, but here in Genesis 50 and verse 20, God says he'll take that evil plan and he'll turn it for his glory. Luke chapter 22 and verse 44 teaches us it was such a sorrowful experience for Jesus that on the eve of Christ's crucifixion, he cried out in agony and he prayed more earnestly, Luke 22:44 says. And then it tells us here in Luke that Jesus' sweat became like drops, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And yet it was that very cross that restored this amazing relationship between us and God. It took the death of God's Son to bring us back into a right relationship with the Father, and that's redemption. And many of us don't understand these big churchy words. And way back in the day, you could get these green stamps that could be redeemed if you collected them. The idea here is that we belong to God, and yet sin separated us. So God bought us back. That's the idea of redemption. God bought us back. How much are you worth? Sandy and I, about 10 days ago, went to a dinner, a gathering to raise money for a godparent home, a ministry for orphan children. And we heard the stories that babies cost $50,000 to $75,000. And Sandy and I looked at each other and said, how much would we have paid for our kids? How much are you worth? How valuable are you? Apparently valuable, because it took the blood of Christ to buy you back. If you're struggling with forgiveness, your relationship with God the Father is hindered. Did you hear me? If you struggle with forgiveness, your relationship with God the Father is hindered. You might have strayed from him unintentionally, but nonetheless, it's becoming obvious to other believers. Just as Jesus did in Luke 22, it says, being in agony, being in pain, suffering, he prayed more earnestly. Have you ever prayed for the person that hurts you? Have you ever prayed for the person that has caused you emotional scars? Genesis 50, verse 22. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Just for your knowledge, if you Google 110 years and Egyptians, that is the ideal lifespan of any Egyptian. The average Egyptian in that day would tell you if you lived 110 years, you were right with Creator God. Verse 23, Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir and the son of Manasseh were also brought up on Joseph's knees. Any grandpa knows what that means, don't you, Gene? Don't you, Jimmy? Don't you, Withers? Those grandkids brought up on your knees, we know what that means. That's that beautiful time between you and your grandkids. Verse 24 and 25, Joseph said to his brothers, I'm dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land, the land which he swore Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Joseph took an oath from his children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. Verse 26, so Joseph died, being 110 years old. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Throughout his life, Joseph learned to trust God. I pray Sandy puts that on my headstone when I die. This stubborn old goat learned one thing, to trust God. When Joseph became a slave, he trusted God. When Joseph became a prisoner, he trusted God. Even as a prisoner, he still trusted God. And Joseph ended up being prime minister in all of Egypt. Now on his deathbed, Joseph knows that even death cannot stop God from keeping his promises. I want to close with this passage. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 to 9. In this you greatly rejoice. Though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. 7. That the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold, like Troy said, that perishes, though tested through the fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom, having not seen, you love. We're not chasing gold and silver. We're chasing Jesus. And even though we haven't seen him, we love him. Verse 8. Though now you do not see him, yet believing, you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory. 9. Receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. One more time, I'm going to close with this question. Are you thankful for the suffering?